Hey Bob, what's the status on that falafel you ordered?
Falafel? I thought you were supposed to order that.
Bro, I told you to order it right after we saw that homeless person standing on the side of the road.
Oh, that must have been it. I was pretty deep down the rabbit hole of fixing homelessness in my brain.
Oh yeah? How did you fix it?
I gave him a house. Boom. Problem solved.
What? Come on, man. There's no way that would work.
It absolutely would. Big brain Bob doesn't get things like this wrong.
So you're saying that giving people houses is the best solution for homelessness?
Yeah.
Okay, Bob. Let me formally challenge you to a debate your socks off research marathon. Topic: giving a person a house as a solution to homelessness. Does it work or does it not work?
You're on, Bob. You know the rules?
Obviously.
1. Only cite things from legit sources. The Guardian does not count.
No name calling.
Fact-checking work is allowed, but only in good faith.
No mama jokes.
Bonus facts only count if they can be tied to the topic.
No biting, scratching, or hair pulling.
Do you understand these rules as I have read them to you?
Yeah. Let's get on with it already.
Housing First solves the most immediate problem of not having a home. All right, let's start with the most obvious part of this discussion. The most immediate problem with homelessness is not having a home.
Groundbreaking. Somebody get this guy a research grant.
With that in mind, Housing First is built on a simple premise, at least according to the research that I found. Solve the biggest, most immediate hurdle first. Get someone off the street and into stable housing, and that foundation gives them the autonomy and the opportunity to start solving everything else.
Okay, but
Here, look at this. This is the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and they have put it really well. They say that people with the foundation of a home are better positioned to take advantage of supportive services. They have the stability to engage in job searching. They have continuity for their children. They have safety that allows them to address traumatic experiences at a pace that actually makes sense for them. They have a place to store medication, manage their health, manage their mental health, manage all of the other things.
Okay, hold on a second though. The National Alliance to End Homelessness, isn't that an advocacy organization? They're not exactly a neutral third party. It's a little like asking the guy who sells umbrellas if it's going to rain.
Yes, they are an advocacy organization, but they aren't making a philosophical argument here. They're describing a functional mechanism. Here's what a home provides. Here's why that matters. Whether you like a source or not, that's logistics.
Sure, but it's logistics framed entirely in the best case scenario.
Sure, I'll give you that. Moving on to a new source. Here, this one. This one comes from HUD.
Which one is the HUD again?
The Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Right.
HUD specifically notes that Housing First works especially well for people with intersecting vulnerabilities. Veterans, people with histories of substance abuse, mental illness, domestic violence, chronic medical conditions like HIV, AIDS. This is what we know. Requiring someone to first seek help for multiple overlapping crises before they even qualify for shelter isn't a ladder. According to the research I found, it's a wall.
I definitely agree that the treatment first model has a real documented problem. But can I just ask, HUD is a federal agency whose budget is partly justified by Housing First programs. So can we say we are getting the full picture when the success of the agency means that they lose their jobs?
You are relentlessly annoying, you know that?
It's a gift.
Fine, yes, institutional bias is a real concern, but the underlying logic the research points to holds regardless of who's publishing it. All the research I found agrees. If someone is juggling mental illness, addiction, trauma, and homelessness all at once, and the system says, fix 3 of those 4 things and then we'll talk about a roof, that's not a recovery program. That's an obstacle course.
I would agree with that. I do love a good obstacle course though. I doubt people living on the streets share my affinity though.
It's doubtful. And look, I know you're going to have something to say about this source I'm about to bring up.
I usually do.
But look at what President Biden has to say. See, he's made statements supporting Housing First policy, and he said that when people experiencing homelessness are provided access to housing, they are able to take steps to improve their health and well-being. They can further their education, seek steady employment, and do all those stability-increasing things to their lives. It's a win for them and the communities around them.
You're quoting the president?
I am quoting a president.
A president who was actively pushing Housing First policy?
Yes.
So that's a source who is, maybe just advocating for his own policy position?
It's a statement of direction from the Executive Office of the United States of America.
It's a press release with a podium.
It's a press release with a very nice podium.
You know I'd give someone else's child for that podium.
So would I.
I guess it helps that we're the same person.
It absolutely does. Back on topic though. The through line across everything that I found is consistent. Stable housing creates a platform for everything else. The other problems become problems someone can actually work on instead of problems that are actively burying them.
I found some things that I have thoughts about.
I assumed you would.
You assumed correctly.
All right, pal, your turn. What you got? Housing First fails to address the root causes of homelessness.
Okay, so Housing First solves the immediate problem of not having a home. Congratulations, it does the thing it says it would do on the box.
I am suspicious of your compliment.
It wasn't a compliment. Because here's what the research on my side keeps coming back to. Housing First is built on the idea that giving someone a home solves homelessness. And according to what I found, that's the point where the wheels...
How so?
Here, look at this. This is Judge Glock of the Cicero Institute citing a UCLA study that found that a significant percentage of the chronically homeless population have a serious mental illness. Most also have a substance abuse problem, and the majority have both.
Okay, the Cicero Institute? That's a libertarian-leaning think tank, yes?
Yes.
So you're citing a judge, not a social scientist, a judge, affiliated with a libertarian policy organization, citing a UCLA study?
Well, when you put it like that, the UCLA study is real, though.
I'm sure it is, but the way it's being interpreted...
Hey, but the numbers are the numbers. Large percentage, mental illness, substance abuse, majority have both. You can dislike the messenger all you want.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, here's where the research gets genuinely uncomfortable. Glock points to several studies that suggest that permanent supportive housing can actually encourage drug use, because now the person has more money available.
I have heard it said, mo money, mo problems.
I'm not sure that saying applies here, but yes. They also have more time available, which the research links to higher rates of crime and higher rates of death. On top of that, other investigations show an increase in mental illness symptoms because permanent supportive housing increased social isolation and did not require any healthcare engagement whatsoever.
Okay, hold on. Several studies? Which studies specifically? Saying that housing people makes their addiction worse is a pretty bold claim, and I want to know where he's getting this information.
That is a completely fair question, and I will be straight with you. Glock references them, but does not actually name them directly in the source material that I have.
So we have a claim attributed to unnamed studies, filtered through a policy advocate that housing people leads to more crime and faster death. And we're just putting that on the table?
Hey, I'm flagging it as a concern the research raises. It's not settled science.
Well, at least I can berate you in the judge's absence.
You know we're the same person, right?
A little masochism never hurt anybody.
I'm not sure we want it on the agenda, though. Back to the point. What I'm getting at here is that the literature I found is pretty consistent on this. People are homeless for reasons. Poverty, unaffordable housing markets, shifting economic trends, drug abuse, mental illness, it goes on and on. But a roof over someone's head does not address any of those factors.
Nothing I found suggests it's supposed to do all of that by itself.
The program is called Housing First, not housing plus everything else simultaneously.
The word first implies a sequence, not a completion.
Does it though? Because Christopher Carlton of the Independent Institute found that the way Housing First is actually being implemented, not just theorized, is that it effectively treats homeless individuals as permanent wards of the state. Here, look at this. The bulk of Housing First grants go to permanent supportive housing for people who need support permanently. Meanwhile, the data shows that almost half of homeless individuals were able to become sufficient under prior programs.
Okay, Independent Institute? Also libertarian-leaning?
So I like a libertarian now and then.
You like a very consistent ideological bibliography is what you like.
The numbers are still the numbers, okay?
Almost half, though? Is that right?
That's what he said.
Because if nearly half of homeless individuals can reach self-sufficiency, that's not an argument against housing them first. Everything I read would suggest that's an argument for making sure the supportive services that follow the housing are actually robust.
Or it's an argument that the prior programs, the ones that required active treatment engagement, were working for nearly half the population, and we walked away from them.
I'm not sure those things necessarily follow, but I suppose I'll give it to you.
Why do I feel like that was a pity point?
Because you are deserving of pity.
Hardy har har. It's your turn. What's your second point?
Housing First is worth the cost and saves more taxpayer dollars than other so-called solutions. All right, let's talk money.
Oh, please. Continue speaking my language.
I thought that might get your attention. So one of the things I've kept running into while researching the pro side is that Housing First isn't just good policy. According to the numbers I found, it's actually good math.
I love a bold start. Keep going.
Check this out. A 2022 study found that Housing First policies cost an average of $16,000 per person per year in the United States.
$16,000 per person?
Whoa, simmer down there, pal. The same study found that the average annual benefit per person was $18,000, meaning the benefits outweigh the costs by $2,000 in the savings category.
Okay, pump the brakes for a second. How are they calculating benefit? That word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Benefit to whom? Measured how? Over what time period?
That is a completely legitimate question, and honestly, one I wish the source material went deeper into. What I can tell you is that the framing is economic. It's not a philosophical benefit, it's a calculated
So
one.
we're trusting a net positive number without fully knowing what's in the numerator?
For now, yes. Flag it, and let me keep going.
Flagged loudly.
Moving on. We come to a 2002 report out of New York. And look, I know 2002 was a while ago.
We were 9 years old.
But the mechanism it describes is worth noting. Look, here it is. An average unhoused person with severe mental illness was using about $40,000 annually in public services. Hospitals, shelters, police intervention, that kind of thing. When that same person was housed, costs dropped by $16,000.
Okay, two things. Number one, 2002, that's over 2 decades of inflation, policy change, and a completely different housing market. Those numbers cannot be directly applicable to today's economy.
Agreed, but the specific dollar amounts aren't the point.
2, average unhoused person with severe mental illness, that's a specific subset of a homeless population. Are we generalizing that across everyone?
I mean, sort of. The research I found uses it as an illustrative data point, not a universal rule.
Okay, illustrative I can accept.
Thank you. All right, let's talk about Maine.
Maine! Sorry, it just seems like an appropriate place for some drama.
It's too bad we're the same person. It could have been someone cool. Oh well. Look, here it is. And it says, Housing First policies in Maine cut the average public cost of homelessness by half. When people were housed, costs of police contact dropped. Ambulance transportation, emergency room costs, incarceration costs, overall healthcare.
Those are some big old references. What are your sources on those?
This article is citing a study of Housing First implementation in Maine specifically.
Do we know the sample size? Because Maine is not a large state, and the homeless population there looks very different from, say, Los Angeles or Houston or New York.
The notes I have don't specify the sample size, and you're right, the Maine's demographic and cost structures aren't universally applicable.
So it's a compelling data point that may not scale.
It really is too bad we have to scale things all the time, huh?
If only. I do appreciate your honesty, though.
Don't get used to it. Here, look at this one. San Francisco. A study of 51 unhoused senior citizens were placed in a skilled nursing facility and reported an almost $1.5 million reduction in hospital costs over 7 years. It's about $4,000 per person per year.
Didn't we just talk about small sample sizes and drawing cost conclusions from them?
We did. But the per person per year reduction is consistent with the broader pattern showing up across multiple studies and multiple cities.
A pattern of small, localized studies that may or may not be generalized nationally.
A pattern of small, localized studies that are at least pointing in the same direction.
Pointing is generous. So like vaguely waving in the general direction feels more accurate.
I mean, I'll take it. My last note on this point. This one. The Urban Institute looked at scaling Housing First up to end chronic homelessness in Denver County, Colorado. They found it would cost between $14 and $18 million annually, but $8 million of that total cost would be offset by savings in other services. Their conclusion was that beyond providing better outcomes for people, the program proved to be a better use of taxpayer dollars than the current status quo of the homelessness jail cycle.
Yeah. The homelessness jail cycle is basically a death sentence.
It really is. And that's kind of the through line across everything I found on this point. The instinct is to look at the price tag of Housing First and recoil, but the research consistently suggests that the alternative, doing nothing or cycling people through emergency rooms and jails and shelters, costs way more. Not just in human terms, but in actual dollars.
I won't pretend that isn't a compelling economic argument.
That's some high praise from you.
Hey, don't push it.
Wouldn't dream of it.
All right, my bucko. It's my turn.
Housing First does not reduce homelessness and may increase unhoused populations.
Okay. Let's talk about whether or not any of this is actually working.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Uh-oh is right. Because here's the thing that kept jumping out at me while I was researching this. If Housing First policies were actually reducing homelessness, you would expect the homeless populations to go down, right? That's the whole point.
I mean, that would be the logical outcome, yes.
Okay, so look at this. Nationally, permanent supportive housing units increased by a fair amount between 2018 and 2023.
That sounds like a good thing.
It should have been a good thing, but
If the policy worked, you would expect to see the unhoused populations to have decreased by at least a comparable amount, right? Instead, the chronically unsheltered homeless populations grew by a lot. Okay, that's a disparity. What's the source on your numbers? These are coming from the National Housing Data Permanent Standard Housing Unit Growth Against Homeless Population Counts. And you know that homeless population counts are notoriously difficult to measure accurately, right?
I didn't actually. That didn't come up in my research. Why are they difficult?
The standard method is the point-in-time count, which is where one night volunteers go out and count people they can physically find, which almost certainly undercounts the actual population.
But it cuts both ways. If anything, undercounting would make the growth look smaller than it actually is.
That's annoying, but fair, I suppose.
Now look at this. Arizona, January 2024. Homeless populations were 9,400 people. December 2023, permanent supportive housing units available in 9,700. There were more units than homeless people. And Judge Glock points out that Arizona has built over 7,000 permanent homes for homeless individuals since 2010, enough to house every unsheltered person when they started. And yet the number of Arizonians living on the street has increased by half.
Okay, Judge Glock again. Same source, same think tank, same ideological framework we flagged last time.
The same numbers, though.
The numbers may be real, but there's a massive variable missing from that framing. Who is occupying those permanent standard housing units? Because if the units are full, that means they're housing people. The question is whether the inflow of newly homeless people is outpacing the capacity of the units.
You're right. That is definitely a question that needs to be answered. Well spotted.
Thank you.
I'm not done, though. Let's look at California. Cities with housing first policies increased permanent standard housing units by 25,000 between 2010 and 2019. The unsheltered homeless populations grew by half as well. The statewide housing first policy was adopted in California way back in 2016 when the homeless population was 31,000. And wouldn't you know it, by 2022, that population had grown to 60,000. That's nearly double the amount of 2016.
But California's housing crisis is one of the most severe in the nation. Costs of living, housing market inflation, economic inequality, those are enormous independent variables that are going to drive homelessness regardless of what intervention policy is in place.
Absolutely. But Housing First advocates said the policy would address that. If the intervention can't keep pace with the problem it's designed to solve, that's worth examining.
That's a fair point. I just want to make sure we're not blaming Housing First for California's entire structural housing failure.
I'm not blaming it. I'm just noting it isn't solving it.
Yeah, okay. I suppose that's a meaningful distinction.
Now let's look at Utah. Housing First policy implemented in 2005. By 2010, the state counted 400 chronically homeless people. By 2022, the number had almost doubled to 790.
Utah is actually interesting because it was held up for years as the Housing First success story. There were headlines saying Utah had essentially ended chronic homelessness.
Was held up as?
Yeah, and then people looked more closely at the numbers. But I'd want to know more about how Utah is defining and counting chronically homeless in 2022 versus 2010, because definitional changes alone can dramatically affect those numbers.
You're right, that is a legitimate concern, I guess, but it also feels a little convenient for you.
It's maybe both of those things simultaneously.
Okay, finally, let's look at this one. Rachel Sheffield of the Heritage Foundation raises something that I found genuinely interesting and worth a ponder, even accounting for the source.
Heritage Foundation, conservative think tank.
Yes, I am aware, but the mechanism she's describing is at least theoretically plausible. She speculates that some people may stay in permanent supportive housing longer than they would have remained homeless, occupying units that would otherwise be available for others. She even speculates that some people might migrate in from other areas that offer permanent supportive housing, and that Housing First may actually incentivize people to remain homeless longer in order to qualify for free housing.
Okay, speculates is doing a lot of work in that sentence. That's not a study, that's a think tank analyst offering a hypothesis.
It's flagged as speculation, okay? I'm not presenting it as data.
Good, because the idea that people are strategically choosing to remain homeless to game a housing waitlist is a pretty dark assumption about human behavior.
It's not an assumption about all people. It's just a question about whether the incentive structure has created this possibility for some people.
Nice save there, pal.
I try. But here's what I keep coming back to. The things I found when researching show that regardless of the reason, the homeless population has grown under Housing First policies. In state after state, city after city, more units built, more people on the street. At some point, that pattern has got to be part of the conversation.
The pattern is real. The cause of the pattern is where I still push back.
And that's exactly the conversation we're trying to have, Bob.
Good, because it's my turn. Housing First reduces the additional consequences of homelessness, including disease and crime. All right, we've talked about the human case for housing first. We've talked about the financial case. Now let's talk about what homelessness actually does to the people experiencing it and to the communities around them.
Oh, where'd the dark cloud come from?
This cloud has always been dark. We're just finally looking at it. So look at what I got for you. 2015, report from the coroner of New Orleans. Homeless camps are infectious disease time bombs.
Whoa. He was gunning for the least subtle title of the year award.
And he got it. The data backs up this extremely unsubtle title, though. Unhoused people face significantly greater risk of acquiring and spreading communicable diseases. We're talking HIV, hepatitis A, hepatitis C, invasive group, a streptococcus infection, Shigella, the list goes on. And the contributing factors are all the usual suspects. A lack of sanitation, no laundry facilities, limited access to vaccinations and healthcare.
Jeez, you're really trying to sober us up before we all drive home, eh? What are the sources for these disease data specifically?
Multiple sources. The research I found cites several studies on communicable disease risk among unhoused populations. It's not a single study making that claim. It's a consistent finding across the data.
Okay. And the argument is that housing directly addresses those risk factors?
Exactly. Providing housing removes the conditions that enable infection in the first place. And for people who've already contracted something, it creates the stability needed to actually treat it. On top of that, it immediately limits the number of people any one person can spread a disease to. You go from a camp with no sanitation to an apartment with a bathroom. Nothing theoretical about it. It's a public health intervention.
Yeah, I guess that's hard to argue with on a purely logical level.
It gets broader though. Beyond communicable diseases, homelessness is associated with significantly higher rates of non-communicable conditions too. Anemia, drug and alcohol addiction, respiratory and cardiac illnesses, diabetes, skin problems, blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on and on. And the research also suggests that housing directly addresses the cause of quite a few of those. Things like exposure to the elements, lack of nutritional food, chronic physiological stress of not having a shelter.
Okay, I want to push on the mental illness piece specifically real fast, because my research suggests that the relationship between homelessness and mental illness is not as cleanly casual as no house causes schizophrenia. For a lot of people, it runs in the other direction. Mental illness contributes to homelessness.
That's a completely valid distinction, and the research I found doesn't claim housing causes mental illness to disappear. What it does show is that the conditions of homelessness, the stress, the exposure, the instability, they worsen existing conditions and create new ones. Housing stabilizes those conditions. It doesn't cure schizophrenia, but it stops making it worse.
Yeah, that's a much more defensible version of that claim.
I know you're a man who loves precision. And it connects directly to the next thing I found. Look. Housing first policies were specifically associated with higher rates of compliance with antipsychotic medication and methadone maintenance therapy. And patients in housing first programs showed reduced average alcohol consumption.
That would be convenient if it was accurate. Where's that from?
This one is from PubMed, but it was also cited across multiple housing first program evaluations. And the mechanism makes intuitive sense. If you have a home, you have somewhere to store medication. You have a stable enough existence to maintain a treatment schedule. You're focused on living rather than purely on surviving.
The survival mode versus wellness mode distinction is very real. I will grant you that.
Now, getting to crime. And I want to be careful here because the research I found is also careful here.
Oh man, here comes the nuance.
Look at this. Directly associating rising crime rates with homelessness is described as tenuous, but what the research does document is that unhoused people are disproportionately involved in the criminal justice system, often for petty infractions, sleeping in public, low-level theft, panhandling, and where drugs are involved, the severity increases. Housing reduces the circumstances that produce those behaviors.
Okay, but here's my question. Is the criminality a product of homelessness, or is it a product of the underlying conditions that caused homelessness? Because if it's the latter, housing alone does not fix that.
Probably both, depending on the individual. But either way, getting someone off the street reduces the opportunity for those infractions to occur, regardless of root cause.
Well, looky here, everybody. It's Mr. Pragmatic.
I'm a pragmatic researcher. But here's the part I want to make sure doesn't get lost, because it did get lost in a lot of the coverage I found. Crimes against the homeless are a massive problem. Here, look at this one. According to the National Coalition for the Homeless, almost 2,000 violent acts have been committed against unhoused people. Sexual assault, people being set on fire, at least 588 murders.
Holy cow, that's horrifying.
And it gets worse. The Bureau of Justice estimates that fewer than 44% of violent crimes against homeless people are even reported, meaning the actual number is almost certainly much higher.
Why such low reporting rates?
Distrust of law enforcement, fear of being arrested themselves, lack of a stable address or identity documents, no consistent ways for authorities to follow up. The homeless population and the police have historically not been on the best of terms.
So housing isn't just about protecting the communities from the homeless, it's also about protecting the homeless from the communities?
Right, and that reframe is one I think gets lost almost entirely in the public conversation about this.
Man, I'm gonna be honest, this part of the conversation is landing pretty hard.
Same. When I found these numbers, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for bringing the mood down so hard right before it's my turn.
Anytime. Housing First has failed, fueling, not alleviating drug and mental health problems that spur homelessness.
All right, last point. And I want to start with something that I think is important to name up front because it was important in the research I found.
Go ahead.
The homeless need help. That's not in dispute, but so do our cities. And all the sources keep coming back to this tension. Maintaining functioning communities requires accountability for everyone, including the unhoused. And that simply providing free housing without any accompanying structure or requirements is not sufficient.
That's a more compassionate framing than I expected from you on point 3.
I contain depths. So my pal Judge Glock again.
Of course.
Look at this. He says there was once genuine hope that housing alone could reduce drug use and mental health problems. But studies have shown that providing subsidized housing does not reduce drug use and often encourages it. The mechanism he describes is the same one we flagged in point 1. No mandated treatment, and the free unit provides people with more money to pursue their habits.
And we still don't have the names of those studies?
We don't. And you're right, it's a real limitation of the source. I won't pretend otherwise.
I appreciate that.
But Glock goes further here than he did in point 1. He says, and this is a direct conclusion from his research, despite some early hopes, the results are in, and we now know that Housing First has failed. It's expensive, ineffective, and often counterproductive. While some individuals may benefit, as a sole strategy for ending homelessness, it has and will continue to frustrate the cities that pursue it.
That is a sweeping conclusion from a source we've already established has a pretty clear ideological orientation.
Yes, it is. And I'm presenting it as his conclusion, not as an established fact. But the pattern we laid out in point 2, more units, more homelessness, state after state, and all that, at least gives that conclusion something to stand on.
Maybe. It's certainly a conclusion to draw from that pattern. Is it the right one? That's a different question.
Agreed. And honestly, that leads directly into the part of my research I found the most constructive. Because the critique isn't just housing first bad. It's we don't actually know what we're dealing with, and we're making policy without knowing.
Say more about that.
The standard method for counting homeless populations is the point-in-time count. Remember we talked about it earlier? One night in January, volunteers go out and count the people they find.
You're right. We flagged it earlier as a measurement problem.
Which is apparently such a significant measurement problem that the research I found described it as inaccurate at best and negligent at worst.
It's a pretty damning assessment of the data underlying basically all of these policy decisions.
On both sides of this conversation, yes. We are all, to some extent, working with compromised numbers.
Don't be so honest. Making me uncomfortable.
It does get more constructive though. There is a model called Built for Zero that I found genuinely compelling as an alternative framework.
Huh. Tell me about it.
Here, look. Instead of counting homeless people once a year on a single night in January, Built for Zero uses a comprehensive accounting of every person experiencing homelessness locally, regardless of whether they're sheltered or unsheltered, updated at least monthly, and then it uses that data to track population level changes in real time. Inflow, outflow, what's working, what isn't. The idea is a rapid feedback loop that tells communities whether they're actually driving reductions in homelessness and lets them make faster, more targeted decisions about how to use funding, housing stock, and other services.
Okay. That's not an argument against housing people. That's an argument for better data infrastructure around all homeless interventions.
Exactly. And that's kind of the broader point. The research on my side isn't uniformly do nothing, it's do smarter things, which could include directing mental health and addiction funding specifically toward homeless populations, designated locations for encampments, expansions of shelters, allowing involuntary commitment to mental health institutions in certain cases, and this one I think is genuinely important, creating real accountability structures for all programs helping unhoused populations, including Housing First.
Oof, the involuntary commitment piece is going to be controversial.
Well, it already is. And the data I looked at doesn't resolve that controversy. It just surfaces it as one of the best tools being discussed.
Fair enough. But I want to push back on the way you're framing this whole thing.
How am I framing things?
The way you're talking about housing first implies it's superficial. But everything I found in my research suggests that a significant portion of the homeless population, stable housing is the intervention. It's not covering up a wound, it's removing the condition that's causing it.
For some of the population. And the research I found consistently suggests that for a significant portion, particularly the chronically homeless with co-occurring mental illness and addiction, housing without treatment isn't removing the condition. It's just changing the location where the condition plays out.
That's probably the most precise version of the disagreement between our two piles of research.
Housing is necessary. Whether it's sufficient is where everything kind of doesn't fit.
And neither of us found a source that definitively answers that question.
Unfortunately, we did not.
Well, folks, those are all my points. Bob, do you have anything else to say?
No, Bob, I do not.
Well, I guess that means you know what time it is then.
You don't have to tell me twice. Falafel night, here we come.
Hey, since we're the same person, does that mean I get to eat your food?
Dude, if I see your hand anywhere near my food, I will chop it off.
But if I don't eat, do you stay hungry?